From the most trusted names in local news, KDPG Sunday Edition.
Good morning and welcome to the KDPG Sunday Edition. I'm Stacy Smith. This week will be crunch time for Pennsylvania lawmakers. The first votes on budget legislation are expected to happen tomorrow. Hundreds of pages of legislation are being drafted, and the final spending bill is expected to be nearly $34 billion. It will likely lead to a busy week of negotiations if the legislature is going to abide by the deadline of July the 1st to enact a budget. Now, one of the legislators who is deeply involved in these budget talks is State Senate Minority Leader Jay Costa, whose district includes parts of Pittsburgh and the city's eastern suburbs. We are joined by Senator Costa to talk about the state budget and some other topics that are taking place in Harrisburg. Also, we are joined today by Joe Smito of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And I want to say also that before we begin, we extended an invitation to one of the Republican leaders in Harrisburg, House Speaker Mike Turzai, the speaker that was not available for us for this week's edition. We hope to have him on sometime in the near future. Senator Costa, thanks so much for joining us again on the KDPG Sunday Edition. You've been on before. Yep. Mainly we had a brief conversation about this. I will start the conversation by saying it does not seem as acrimonious as in the past of trying to get a budget.
It has not been, even the last couple of years. I think there's been this recognition that, we have a job to do. I think we learned from the 2015-16 cycle where we had done a lot of things where individuals and organizations were impacted in the school districts because we had such a lengthy delay. So we've been working together to try to recognize that we need to get things done, and that's what our goal is. Successful with that last 3 years, and I think this year as well.
So is this a kumbaya? I mean, Republicans and Democrats are holding hands, walking down the aisle?
Well, I don't know if we're quite there yet, but yeah. I know we do have more fruitful conversations at an earlier point in time, and we work through some of the differences that we have along those lines. All
right, well, the basics of it, of course, as our viewers probably know, is that we have a Democratic governor, and we have a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate. Mm-hmm. So let's take some of the topics that are coming up in the budget. Where do things stand on always the hot topic of education?
Well, education, the governor proposed earlier this year a $34.1 billion budget, which included about $200 million increase in what I'll call K-12 spending, $50 million for special ed, $40 million in early learning, and no increases for higher ed. Since that time and through the negotiations, you're likely to see, it's not fun, there's no finality to the numbers right now. But I will say to you, we're probably going to come very close to recognizing and supporting the numbers that the governor had laid out in early February. The only change would be that there would be an increase in higher ed as well as we go forward. So that's probably the only thing that we would change other than what the governor's already proposed.
So in the past, the University of Pittsburgh and some others were going to be stagnant. You're saying that they may be getting an increase of some sort.
That's correct. And community colleges as well, and as well as career and technical education programs as well. So those all will be part of that discussion.
The state of Pennsylvania, I believe the last time I was able to check on it, ranked around the 20th or so as far as high school graduation rates go, and around the 9th as far as spending on education. Are you satisfied with that level? I mean,
no, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, how much more money can you put into per pupil? Because it's around $15,000 something right now.
It's a situation I think we have to continue to address. I do believe, and I think the governor believes, that we still are not properly funding our school districts across the Commonwealth. And I think we have, over the course of the past 4 years and now the 5th year, we're working very hard to replace the $1 billion that was cut back in 2011, largely because of some of the things that were done as related to the stimulus money that had come in from the federal government. So we have replaced that $1 billion shortfall, and now we're trying to build upon that and continue to make investments in our school districts, and that's something that's always been a high priority of the governor, and it's been a priority of our Senate Democrats as well.
When you talk about possible increase for higher education, what about the state system schools?
Well, the state system schools will be part of that. When I say higher ed, I mean the state system schools, I mean community colleges, I mean the state related. So they'll all enjoy probably roughly the same increase.
Also, there are school districts, Penn Hills being one of them, that run into problems. Is there any effort by the state legislature to make sure the leadership within school boards really know what they're doing? I mean, because when you get right down to it, it's the grassroots right there. People aren't paid; they run for school board because they really want to make a change, and sometimes errors are made.
There are things that the School Board Association has in place in terms of to work with the individual school board members who are elected every couple of years, as well as the state sort of the auditing that's done by the Auditor General. In this particular instance with Penn Hills, For the last couple of years, they've been under what's referred to as a school watch, so to speak, which they've given technical support from Harrisburg to monitor what's being done. They've now since transitioned to a school recovery situation where they have a school recovery officer who is now putting together a plan for them to adopt, and I think they're going to adopt on the 29th. We've worked closely with them resource-wise to make certain that we're able to drive additional resources to Penn Hills, but they've got a long way to go. In this instance, their problem, in my view, has not necessarily it's been because of a previous board action with regard to making some decisions that were not necessarily based on found financial situation that was really occurring, and put them in this dilemma, and that's where things are at. And it's going to take a little while to come out of it.
All right.
The governor, I think, said that he would veto, and maybe he already has, a bill that the legislature passed to expand the EITC program.
Yes, he did.
Could you explain what that is and whether you think a veto is the right move?
In this particular instance, I'll start with the latter. Yes, I do think the veto was the right move. The EITC program there's like three parts to it. There's the EITC for K-12, there's EITC for pre-K, and then there's the other Opportunity Scholarship Program that's been sitting at $50 million for a number of years. And that's a program that provides tax credits to entities, organizations, or companies that want to buy these tax credits from the Commonwealth, and then they turn around and invest them in different schools, public and private, mostly private schools across the Commonwealth. That increase has, the legislation that the governor has vetoed, by the way, would have increased, initial increase of $100 million more to the EITC program. And then beyond that would have allowed for an escalator every year. The cumulative effect over 5 years, based upon the Department of Revenue's review, was about $650 million in lost revenue to the Commonwealth over 5 years. And the governor's position, and I agree, and members of my caucus also felt the same way, that we have many other challenges that we need to look at as we go forward along those lines. Certainly, as I mentioned, the underfunding of education in a more broad sense, that will be have those resources available to invest in public education. We also, and the intent of the program was initially to help folks, low-income individuals without the means to be able to make a decision along the lines of supporting a private school education. So that was the original intent of the program. It also expanded the income limits to $9,000 for households. So those are some of the reasons why, but probably the bigger reason was the $650 million price tag. And that was one of the reasons why the governor vetoed it.
This is one of the rare times, though, that the United States Senator, Pat Toomey, called on the governor not to veto this legislation.
Yes, it was interesting to hear U.S. Senator Pat Toomey weigh in. But what I think he failed to realize is over the past 3 years, we have increased the ITC. Over the past 3 years, we've increased it by $60 million. We had a $25 million increase, a $10 million increase, and just last year, another $25 million increase to that funds. And it's now, I believe, the ITC piece is at $160 million, but the other two have really not increased at all over those 3 years, and that's disappointing.
Well, those recent increases in the ITC, have those been along party lines, or have they been
bipartisan? Oh, yes. No, I apologize. They've been bipartisan. They've been the result of the work of the legislature working together to increase EITC. There's strong support for EITC improvement, and I would venture to say, we still have 4 days before.
I was just going to bring that up. Is this still, is it totally off the table? Or?
Oh, no, not at all. I still think there's likely to be another call for an EITC, not just at a one-time $100 million increase and then subsequent large percentage increases as we go forward and expanding the base. I do believe that you're likely to see another increase like we did the last 3 years, anywhere from 10 to 25 million, I think would be one of the things. So there's strong bipartisan support for EITC. I support it. Those are the things we think are appropriate.
Is it incorrect for me to take a look and say, all right, the governor vetoes the EITC, and at the same time, about the same time, the state house decides not to follow through with the I can't remember the exact name of it, the payment that people receive that are poor, about $2 million.
General assistance?
General assistance.
Yeah, they're certainly disappointed that that's been the case, but the general assistance number the conversation has been around for a couple of years. Back in, I think, the Corbett years, we eliminated the general assistance, not we, along party lines, Republicans eliminated the general assistance program. And through a court case, the court said that we did it improperly, or the General Assembly did it improperly, reinstated the program. Governor Wolf then has reinvested in the program the last couple of years, but Republicans have been adamant about not wanting to continue the general assistance program. I'm a believer that it's a good program. It provides folks who are disabled or temporarily disabled about $200 a month. We're talking about less than 10,000 individuals. It's a program that allows folks to be able to maintain and buy the things that they're not able to do with other program support. So, but at the end of the day, that's been something that they will likely insist on through this general budget process.
To eliminate. And keep it away.
Keep it away.
So it's not going to come back as perhaps EITC.
Well, I think we're hopeful that there's language that allows the governor to be able to continue despite the insistence that the Republicans don't want it to happen.
What's the status of two sort of proposals that come up year after year? One is a severance tax on natural gas drillers, and the other, this idea that municipalities that rely on the state police for protection should be service.
I would say on both, I think the odds are not very good that either one is going to move forward. I've introduced the legislation to require municipalities to pay on a sliding scale for the state police coverage. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have indicated to me and to the governor, and this was part of the governor's proposal as well, the budget proposal back in February, that they're not going to move that legislation. Simple as that. There have been Democrats and Republicans who have introduced similar legislation. For whatever reason, it's not going to take place this year. The governor earmarked about $100 million in revenue from across the state, and we won't be receiving that revenue this year. And when you look at the number of municipalities, it's a growing number. I mean, it's like maybe 40% of the municipalities across the Commonwealth are now using state police as their primary police service. And it's disappointing. And I look to, for me, the poster child for this conversation is Hemphill Township in Westmoreland County. When you look at a thriving business community, a very wealthy county, municipality, they don't have a police department. They rely upon the state police. That's disappointing. Those are the places that I think should maybe be participating in a program that I referenced. On Marcellus Shale, the governor again has proposed that we do something along those lines. He's tying it this time. As opposed to going into the general fund, he's tying it into a program called Restore PA, which will provide local governments in particular infrastructure dollars that they need. Infrastructure dollars for roads and bridges, water lines, sewer lines, issues, landslides issues here in Allegheny County. We're working on to try to do that. And then finally, expanding our access to broadband and our technological infrastructure in rural Pennsylvania. Those two are being tied together. But the latter, the Marcellus Shale piece, is probably not going to happen this time around.
I was going to say, any chance? I mean, the Republicans in the past have said no to this increase. They feel an increase of a tax on the drillers.
Yeah, I think the Speaker has been very clear about not wanting to do that, and they point to the fact that we do have an impact fee or impact tax, whatever you want to call it. It generates about $200 million a year. So that's.
Has that amount been stagnant? I mean, does it increase or does it stay the same?
It goes back and forth. It goes up sometimes. I think the high water mark might have been $225 million a few years back. I think it might be down around 195 to 200 now. I have to go back and look to see what this last year's collection was, but it's around that amount annually.
All right. We will continue our discussion on the KDPG Sunday edition in just a moment.